My name is Matt, and this happened to me on November 16th, 2024. It was a Saturday night, and I had just finished a later shift at work in Eugene, Oregon. I was heading to Florence on the Oregon coast to spend an early Thanksgiving with some family. We had all pitched in and rented a house for the weekend, and I was looking forward to catching up with everyone and having a couple of days off. After work, I drove straight home, packed up my things, and grabbed some fast food for dinner on the road. I figured I'd eat while driving since it was already dark and I wanted to get to Florence before it got too late. I was on Highway 126 heading west out of Eugene. That stretch of road outside of town is mostly quiet at night, and it's a very rural area. I was barely out of Eugene, near Green Hill Road, when I saw something I still can't quite wrap my head around. It was an overcast night with light rain and thick clouds covering the sky, so there wasn't much to see except the glow of my headlights on the road ahead. I had the radio on low and was trying to eat and drive when something caught my eye to the northwest toward the little community of Elmira. At first I thought it was just a flash of lightning, but it wasn't. This was a deep, pulsing red light that lit up the clouds in perfectly timed intervals. It was massive. So bright it made the clouds glow like someone had flipped on a giant red floodlight. The flashes were steady and almost mechanical, like the rhythm of a metronome and about one flash per second. I immediately slowed down, leaning over the steering wheel to get a better look. The light seemed to be coming from somewhere high up in the clouds or possibly above them, but there was no way to see the source. It just kept pulsing this eerie red glow, filling up the sky in a perfect rhythm. I rolled down my windows to see if I could hear anything, but it was completely silent other than the sound of my car on the wet road. I didn't hear any thunder at all, even though I was sure this wasn't lightning. The flashing went on for maybe 2 minutes, then just stopped abruptly. 1 second the sky was pulsing red, and the next it was just dark and overcast again. I kept driving, but was looking out all of my windows in every direction, trying to figure out what I'd just seen, but there was nothing. I was trying to come up with all of the things it could have been, like a plane or a drone or even fireworks of some kind, but none of those things I could think of fit at all. This was an even, perfectly timed, pulsing light that was huge and bright, and it didn't move from that one spot in the sky. I finished my drive to the coast, glancing up at the sky every few minutes hoping I'd see it again, but the rest of the drive to Florence was completely uneventful. By the time I reached the rental house, my family was already settled in, laughing and chatting in the kitchen with empty pizza boxes and drinks. I walked in, sat my bag down, and told them about what I'd seen on the drive over. Some of my family suggested the same things I had thought of, and that it could have been a plane or maybe some kind of lightning, but I knew it wasn't. Honestly, it didn't look like anything I've ever seen before. We talked about it for a while, but eventually the conversation drifted to other things, and I went to bed that night still thinking about it. The next morning, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something really weird, and I needed to know more. Over coffee, I pulled out my phone and started searching online for reports of strange lights over Eugene. Surprisingly, it didn't take long to find a video on Instagram that stopped me cold. Someone had actually posted a clip showing the exact same red flashes I had seen. The person filming was on the same highway I was on, and you can even hear him saying, "What in the hell was that?" at the end of the video. The comments were filled with speculation. Some people thought it was some kind of experimental aircraft, others guessed it was a transformer exploding. A lot of people said lightning, but that explanation is completely out. I've seen plenty of storms in my life, and lightning doesn't flash in perfect intervals like that. Whatever this was, it was deliberate and controlled. I must have watched that video over a dozen times, relieved that someone else had seen it and documented it. To this day, I don't know what it was, and I haven't found any official explanations or heard of anyone coming forward to claim responsibility for it. But I do feel lucky in a way. Not everyone gets to see something so unexplainable. Something that makes you stop and question what's really out there. I'd love to know what it was, or at least hear from someone who knows more. Until then, it's just one of those things I'll always remember, a mystery that will stay with me forever. My husband Dave and I love camping, especially in remote areas where it feels like we're the only people around. This trip was no different. A quick 2-night trek through the Gila Wilderness in southwestern New Mexico, a place we'd never explored before. We planned to do the Middle Fork Trail, following the Gila River through some rugged, isolated terrain. It's a somewhat popular route, but this was in May, shortly after the peak of COVID, so we were hoping we wouldn't see too many people. The area is stunning with high desert cliffs, juniper trees, and cottonwoods along the beautiful river. It's about as far from civilization as you can get in this part of the country, but the proximity to White Sands Missile Range always made me feel like there was an invisible line where the wilderness met something else entirely. White Sands is one of the largest military installations in the country, covering over 3,000 square miles. You can't really see it when you're in the Gila Wilderness or anything, but it's not too far away. We set out from the trailhead just after lunch when the air was warm and there wasn't a cloud in the sky. The first day's hike was relatively easy, weaving along the river through shaded stretches and exposed rocky sections. We made it about 6 miles in before deciding to set up camp on a sandy bank just up a bit from the water. There was no one else around us, which was amazing. The silence out there is one of the best parts. You can hear every little gust of wind and trickle of water from the river, and that always makes me feel such a deep sense of peace and gratitude for being alive. The first night was totally normal and relaxing, at least at first. We had some food, watched the stars come out, and settled into the tent around 9. I was just starting to drift off to sleep when I noticed a faint vibration under my sleeping pad. At first, I thought it was in my head. Sometimes when you're really still and it's quiet, you can feel your heartbeat or pulse in your ears, but this was different. The ground itself was humming. It was a low, steady vibration that felt like a machine running far away, except it wasn't coming from any specific direction. It was just everywhere. I mentioned it to Dave, and he said he could feel it too. We both laid there in silence, trying to figure out what it was. It wasn't loud, more like a background noise you would only notice when everything else is still. What made it even stranger is that we could actually feel it, not just hear it. Through our sleeping pads, there was a subtle but constant vibration, almost like the ground was alive. We could literally put our hands on the bottom fabric of the tent and feel it. It wasn't strong enough to shake anything, but it was unmistakable. The next morning, we talked about it over breakfast. Dave thought it might have something to do with White Sands or one of the other military bases around. He said maybe they were testing equipment underground or flying drones nearby, though we didn't hear anything in the sky at all. I wasn't so sure though, because I think the nearest base was close to 50 miles away, and the humming didn't sound mechanical to me, at least not in a way I could identify. After eating, we shrugged it off and packed up our gear, figuring it was just one of those weird things you encounter in the wilderness. Our plan for the day was to hike another 5 or so miles to a campsite farther up the river. The day was uneventful, aside from the incredible scenery and a stop to put our feet in the river and have lunch. The second night was when things got even stranger. We found a flat spot to camp near a bend in the river and set up as usual. We cooked some food, Dave played a few songs on his little beat-up backpacker guitar, and then we crawled into our tent, but as soon as we laid down, we felt it again. This time the humming was stronger. You could immediately feel the vibration with your hand on the bottom of the tent, and the ground actually felt warm this time. Even through our sleeping bags, we could feel the vibrating, and this light amount of heat felt like it was radiating upward, almost like we were lying on an electric blanket set to low. It was such a strange sensation. We laid there for what seemed like hours, tossing and turning and unable to sleep, speculating about what could be causing it. Dave brought up geothermal activity underground, which I guess made sense in one way, but it just seemed too steady to be that. And only at night? Why would that only happen at night? I started thinking about the military base again and wondered if they could be doing some kind of underground testing. It seems far-fetched, I know, but I couldn't come up with anything else, and neither one of us had ever experienced anything like this. What unsettled me the most was how unnatural it felt. The warmth wasn't like the heat from a campfire or the sun-warmed ground during the day. It was consistent and unchanging, and the vibration was just as steady. It really wasn't a feeling I liked, and it was starting to irritate me. It was right at the line of being too annoying to sleep. I told Dave if I had to feel a feeling like that every night, it would drive me crazy. By morning, the ground felt cool again and the humming was gone. It was like nothing had happened. We were both a bit tired, so we packed up, finished the hike, and drove home. When we got back into cell service range, I started searching for any mention of humming ground or vibrations near the Gila Wilderness or White Sands Missile Range. I found a few vague forum posts from hikers and campers who'd experienced something similar, but nothing definitive. Some people mentioned geothermal activity, others blamed the military, and a few even threw out wild theories about underground bases and aliens living in the New Mexico desert. The only thing I could really find was about something called the Taos hum, which is a low-frequency noise people hear in northern New Mexico. But this wasn't just a sound, it was a physical vibrating, so it didn't seem like the same thing. It's been 4 years since we took that trip, and I still think about it. I love the Gila Wilderness, and even though we haven't been back since, I would do another trip in a heartbeat. I can't say I wouldn't be worried about feeling that vibration again, though. My name is Nate, and I've lived in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho my whole life. I'm 28 now, and until last summer, I thought I had my life pretty well figured out. I had a good job and a decent apartment, and I'd been with my girlfriend, who I'll just call Allie for this story, for 3 years. I was sure we'd eventually get married, but then life completely stomped me down. It was a Saturday in the middle of August, and I had just found out Allie had been cheating on me. The worst part was that it was with a guy we both knew, and someone I grew up playing basketball with when we were in school. I didn't even hear it from her directly. A mutual friend told me, and when I confronted Allie, she admitted it. The whole week after that was a total blur. I tried to keep myself together and go to work, but by Thursday night, I was falling apart. Friday morning, I called my boss and told him I was sick. I wasn't actually sick, but I just couldn't mentally face customers that day and was absolutely heartbroken, to be honest. I needed to get out and be alone for a day. Coeur d'Alene sits right on Lake Coeur d'Alene, and it's where I've always gone when I needed to clear my head. I have a lifetime of memories on the lake, and I felt like I needed to be there. I packed a small cooler with a few cans of Coors, threw my inflatable raft in the back of my truck, and drove out to a quiet spot near Higgins Point. It was a hot and somewhat humid day, and there was supposed to be thunderstorms coming in, but the lake was calm when I got there around 11:30 in the morning. There were a normal amount of boats and people, but it wasn't too crowded. I parked, carried my gear down to the water, and inflated my raft. Within a half an hour, I was out on the water and finally starting to feel a little better. I opened a beer, paddled away from anyone, and let the raft drift. I tried to let the water and the hum of boat motors and people in the distance take my mind off of everything, but the truth was, I felt like a complete mess. I was mad at Allie, mad at the guy she had been with, and mostly just mad at myself for not seeing it. By the time I opened my second beer, I was lying flat on my back in the raft, staring up at the sky. It was partly cloudy, with big puffy clouds rolling in higher and higher. You could tell they'd be turning into thunderstorms by late afternoon. I was watching one particular cloud directly overhead when I noticed something strange. Inside this cloud, I was seeing shadows. At first, I thought it was just the way the light was hitting it, but these shadows were moving. I sat up a little bit, thinking maybe there was a small plane flying above the clouds, casting a shadow, but the shapes didn't move like a plane would. They weren't moving in a straight line. They were all over the place, almost like they were chasing each other, darting in and out of denser parts of the cloud. I could see two distinct dark shapes moving inside the cloud. It was hard to tell how big they were, maybe the size of a car. After what I'm guessing was a full minute, they came together in the center of the cloud, then both shot out of one side. I didn't actually see anything come out of the cloud, but I saw what looked like water vapor being disturbed on the side of the cloud. Kind of like when a boat cuts through the water. It billowed out on one side as if something had physically pushed through it. That's when I started to feel uneasy, and I wasn't sure what I'd just seen, but it didn't feel normal. I grabbed my paddle and started heading back to shore. By the time I got to shore and started letting the air out of my raft, the sky was getting darker, and it looked like it could start raining soon. I sat on a rock by the edge of the water for another half hour watching the clouds, but I didn't see anything else. I couldn't shake the feeling that something weird had been up there, though. I can't quite explain how strange it looked in person. I mean, these were definite, real shapes moving around in the cloud. At this point, the wind had picked up and I could hear thunder in the distance, so I decided to head back home. That evening, I drove over to my parents' house for dinner. I didn't want to be alone in my apartment after everything that had happened with Allie, and definitely not after what I saw on the lake. While we were eating, I told my mom and dad about the shadows in the clouds. My dad said it had to be some kind of natural weather phenomenon with the storm rolling in, but I know he'd think differently if he had actually seen it. The more I played it back in my mind, the more I'm certain it was not natural. It couldn't be. Even now, months later, I can't stop thinking about it. I've spent my entire life on that lake in so many different weather conditions, and I've never seen anything like it. I know it wasn't just a weather phenomenon. It was something else, and unfortunately, I'll probably never get an answer. At least it helped me feel better that day, and after it happened, I barely remember thinking about Allie that entire weekend. I think my mind was too busy trying to come up with an explanation. This was about a month ago, on a Tuesday evening if I recall right. I was out on the back 40 of my family farm here in Darke County, Ohio. The sun was just starting to set and the sky was lit up with that deep orange glow you get right before dusk. I always like that time of day because it's quiet and peaceful. I was walking along the fence line checking for breaks because coyotes had been getting bold lately and I didn't want to lose any more chickens. As I made my way near our creek, something caught my eye hovering just above the treetops. I don't rightly know what to call it, but it wasn't a plane, that's for sure. This thing was silent, just hanging there in the air like it didn't have a care in the world. It looked like a big silver slab of metal, not the classic flying saucer people talk about. From my angle, it was shaped more like a rectangle with sharp edges and a bit of thickness to it. It had this strange sheen, almost like a rainbow effect you sometimes see in certain kinds of metal when the light hits just right, or the colored light you might see on a puddle of oil. I stood there, frozen, my hands still resting on the fence. My heart was pounding, but I couldn't move. I was too stunned to even think straight. I noticed it had flashing lights on it too, but they weren't like any airplane or helicopter lights I've ever seen. They were different colors and in no pattern I could make sense of. The hair on the back of my neck stood up, and I had this weird, unsettling feeling like I was being watched, or like something wasn't quite right in that moment. For several minutes it just hovered there, completely still and completely silent. I couldn't hear a hum, a buzz, or any sound at all. Then, out of nowhere, it shot straight up into the sky. When I say shot up, I mean it disappeared faster than I could blink my eyes. 1 second it was there, and the next it was just gone. No sound, no trail, nothing. I stood there for a while, just staring at the spot where it had been, trying to process what had just happened. I know how this might sound to some people. They'll say I was imagining things or on something, but I wasn't. I know what I saw, and I'll swear on it. I've lived on this farm my whole life, and I've never seen anything like it before. To be honest, I hope I never see it again. Whatever that thing was, it wasn't from around here, and it didn't belong here. I can't shake the feeling that something strange is out there, and all I can do is hope it doesn't decide to come back.